Well, good morning and welcome. Sarah, could you call the roll?
Nancy Backus.
Here.
Angela Burney.
Here.
Dow Constantine.
Here.
Reagan Dunn. Jenny Durkin. Lorena Gonzalez.
Here.
Jonathan Hemphill.
Here.
Andrew Lewis.
Here.
Kirk McLean.
I'm here.
Joe McDermott.
Here.
Ed Prince.
Here.
Zanetta Reed.
Zanita Reed. Here.
Zanita. Apologies. All right. So we have 10 out of 12 members present.
Oh, well, we're doing better than we thought. Thanks,
And
everyone.
Jenny Durkin is here.
Oh, hello, Mayor. So we want to start off just with a brief reminder. We're going to follow the same meeting procedures as during the last meeting. We are going to ask questions. We're going to try to raise our hand by clicking the button on the right side of the screen. Then you'll be entered into a queue. And when the discussions formally begin, Sarah Dickmeyer, who's our Zoom host, will call on you in the order in which you raise your hand. And after your turn, if you want to talk some more, just raise your hand again and you'll get back in the queue. If there are any problems with raising your hand or muting or unmuting or any of the other Zoom etiquette challenges, please comment using the chat function, or I suppose wave your hands wildly, and Sarah and staff team will work to resolve the problems. We have 30 minutes set aside later on in today's agenda for public comment. If you'd like to provide verbal comment, please type your name and the city from which you're calling or incorporated King County into the chat function now. And this will allow us to build a queue for that part of the agenda. And in addition, you may want to use the chat function to provide written comment starting now in the comment section of the agenda closes. There are a couple other brief notes. You'll note that the selection of co-chairs and the adoption of bylaws has been postponed to a later meeting. With the support of fellow committee members, Mayor Durkin and I will continue to serve as interim meeting conveners until then. And finally, you will note that I will be using first names, so we'll just adopt that as the protocol in referring to one another and not titles from this point forward. And I've asked for our staff to use first names as well. So I encourage all of us to refer to each other in that way as we move forward, starting now. Minutes. We have minutes from our May 1st meeting. You should have received a copy of those, and I would entertain a motion to approve the May minutes. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
This is Nancy Backus. I'll second.
Sorry, just once more. Who just made the motion?
I did. Ed Prince.
Ed made the motion. Is there a second?
Nancy Backus, second.
Nancy, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any additions or corrections to the May minutes? Well, hearing none, I could just take a voice vote. Do we need to call the roll, Sarah?
We do, and I can start that now if we're ready.
Okay, please call the roll.
Nancy Backus.
Is this a roll call vote?
Yeah, on approved minutes as presented.
Yes.
Angela Burney.
Yes.
Dow Constantine.
Aye.
Reagan Dunn. Jenny Durkin.
Aye.
Lorena Gonzalez.
Aye.
Jonathan Hemphill.
Aye.
Andrew Lewis.
Aye.
Kirk McLean.
Aye.
Joe McDermott.
Aye.
Ed Prince.
Aye.
Zanita Reed.
Aye.
The ayes have it, 11, 0 nays.
By your vote, minutes of the May 21st, 2020 meeting are approved as presented. We now turn to public comment. As I said, we've set aside 30 minutes to hear from members of the public. I will close public comment either when there are no more people to speak or when 30 minutes is expired, which will be at 10:40. I will ask Sarah to call in individuals in the order that they have been provided in the chat window. Each individual will have 2 minutes to comment. Sarah will announce when 2 minutes is reached and ask you to please summarize and finish your comments and call in the next turn. And please, if you would, provide your full name for the record in commenting. Public comment is now open. Sarah, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We do. I will be calling on Bill Curlin Hackett, calling in from Auburn first. Just 1 second as I unmute you, Bill. You should be unmuted.
There.
Do we have you, Bill?
Is that better?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
your 2 minutes starts as soon as you start.
Yeah, congratulations on all of you for being the governing board on this new necessary effort. I want to just encourage a few things, especially around transparency and communication. We spend a lot of time trying to keep the public and especially faith community informed, and I think that transparency and communication can be improved. Also, during all the buildup through All Home, there was a lot of discussion about faith representation and participation. If I haven't heard about it, I'm guessing it's not happening. I'm certainly willing to talk to folks about how we do that. Also, the implementation board, I was solicited by Seattle for nominations for 2 members that it's seeking. I've heard nothing else except a letter Leo sent way back in December. So that would be good if we can have more transparency about how that's happening. And obviously, you know how key that board is. I was just on the South King Housing and Homelessness Partnership homelessness call-in yesterday, and we are all knowing that we're carrying the burden as people on the streets, with people on the streets, with shelters, and thankfully we've been set up fairly well, but at the same time we don't seem to have the oversight that we need, the voices to make what's happening more public. Of course, I realize what's going on. Many of you who are electeds are dealing with far greater things than you've seen in your terms, and all of us are. But at the same time, I want to encourage the conversations offline that we need to strengthen this board and the new incoming system. So I want to thank you and also give you great encouragement to speak more when we're not in these meetings. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill.
And that is it for the queue of public comment. I think we'll give it 1 more minute to see if anyone else decides to join in the chat box.
Chair Constantine, this is Cody Eccles from Reagan Dunn's office. Can I have a quick second to say something on behalf of Reagan?
You may speak as part of public comment. Go ahead.
Reagan just wanted me to let you know that he apologizes for not being on here. He'll be on as soon as he possibly can. He's coming down off a plane from the East Coast and should be on shortly. And I'll switch out as soon as he can get on. Thanks. That's all.
Thank you. All right. Sarah, are we seeing any more public comment?
No more additions to public comment. I believe we can move on to the next item.
Thank you. And by executive fiat, I'm going to, because public comment was so short, leave the written public comment section open until the conclusion of the meeting today, in case there are others who join later who missed the opportunity for verbal comment. And again, that can be posted in the chat box. Next item is update on establishing staff parity for the lived experience leaders who are board members. We're going to be hearing from Leo Flor, who's the director of King County Department of Community Human Services, who's right there. And Leo, update us on the status of establishing parity for staffing for our board members representing individuals who have experienced homelessness. Go.
Thank you and good morning, committee members. This item requires no action from the committee, and the purpose is to provide an update on where we are towards the goal that we share of establishing full-time independent staffing that can support the lived experience leaders of the governing committee. DCHS, the Department of Community and Human Services at King County, is currently mid-course in a procurement that will make an award that will fund a entity that the lived experience leaders have selected. They will be the hiring authority once the process is complete. And the result will be at least one full-time person employed through the contract that is responsive directly to the 3 lived experience leaders on the governing committee. The scope of work also includes support of the 3 lived experience leaders who will be on the implementation board as well. The status right now, we are actually in a sole source waiver process that I believe will result in the initial award being made or offered to an entity by the end of this month. And our goal is to have by the next scheduled meeting or regular meeting of the governing committee, which is in the 3rd week of July, that we will have staffed and provided that staffing parity to the lived experience leaders on this committee. That is the content of my brief, but I'm happy to answer questions or receive direction.
Sure, I have a question. You mentioned, this is Kirk, you mentioned that this entity will have a hiring authority. What specifically did you mean by that? Are they going to be able to say no to a person that we decide that we want to staff, or are they? Who has the authority to say yay or nay as far as the last word as far as the person getting hired or not?
Yes. Follow-up question as well.
The scope of work that we are letting is for a entity that can hire on behalf of you, Kirk, Zanita, and Jonathan. And so my assumption, although I think it'll be something for you to finally specify with the entity that can actually do the hiring, is that you all will be the hiring deciders and would be the final word in who will staff and support you.
Okay. And who was the entity you mentioned an agency that is going to be helping with that?
So the rationale right now is seeking a sole source procurement compliant process, and the sole sourced entity would be an organization called Building Changes, working as a fiscal agent for the Lived Experience Coalition. That specific entity as a named entity is dependent upon whether or not a sole source contract is allowed. If a sole source contract is not allowed, we would go into an open bidding process, in which case we would provide the scope of work. You would have the final hiring authority, but we could not predetermine who the organization would be.
Great.
Okay. Thank you. And I have a follow-up question, Leo. I raised my hand, but I'm just going to chime in real quick. So in terms of just follow-up in this, I have not been, and I don't know if any of my colleagues, and I'm sure they haven't, we all are together, united, and front as part of the Lived Experience Coalition. And so we haven't been actually updated on the status up until today. So from now on, can you ensure that there's no other conversations about us without us, and that we have direct communication lines about this process moving forward?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you very much.
Up next, we have Angela.
Thank you. I am, in listening to you, thank you, Leo. I do have concerns about, we are already in this process, we're already having staff meetings. I want them to have that opportunity to have someone working for them now. Is there someone we can place in that role temporarily while this is going on? The description of the process sounds to me like it might take some time. And I think we're deciding so much now. We're putting them in a position where there are, we're asking them to be their own staff, and I just don't think that's really equitable in this situation. And I defer to them for if that's something that they would like, but I don't feel comfortable with them not having someone in place, at least temporarily, they can agree on to do that part of the work for them. I don't feel comfortable with that.
Thank you for certainly if it's what Zanita, Kirk, or Jonathan would want, Angela, that we would be able to find somebody or seek to find somebody who could perform that role. We have been inviting, as you mentioned, Angela, Kirk, Zanita, and Jonathan to staff meetings in the meantime to ensure that there is at least the opportunity. And we are, as the staff group that supports this committee, undertaking a number of important sort of staffing functions, including the nomination committee to the implementation board. So if Zanita, Kirk, and Jonathan wanted to try to ask us to find somebody who could perform the function in the interim, we will certainly do that. I think one of the goals that we have is that identification of a full-time, dedicated, independent staff member to the lived experience leaders, and the type of support that we would provide in the meantime would, I think by necessity, be a current government employee who we could ask to perform staffing functions. And I would just at that point acknowledge that we wouldn't at least be establishing the independence that we're seeking in that staffing, but I'm happy to follow direction from the lived experience leaders.
Up next, we have Jonathan.
Hello. So yeah, I would also say that thank you for bringing that up. You know, like this process, trying to be a part of the staffing committee is a little bit of a challenge because of the fact that a lot of the meetings, there's been discrepancies on like meeting times and sending out emails and stuff like that. And so I just appreciate that is acknowledged, and that we do need, I want to reinforce that we do need all of the same resources that is afforded to all of the other staffing groups and staffing persons and the governing committee. And so we would like to be on like all distro, and have all the resources available to us that everyone equally has. And then in terms of who we like to staff us, I think that we can have a conversation offline with you, Leo, moving forward. But I also just want to be clear so that there is no barrier in terms of who we can have in the interim for a staff person.
I'd be happy to schedule an additional conversation with members of the lived experience leadership on the committee. And we are proceeding right now with the procurement to accomplish the hiring that you all have directed. And if there is an interim person, I don't believe that, because the person wouldn't be paid, I don't believe that there's a obstacle to whoever you would choose being able to perform that function.
All right, awesome.
Next, we have Zanita.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's really important that we have the same resources and staffing, because getting an email an hour before a meeting and then being expected to make decisions that are really, really important it's non-productive, because I can't make an important decision that affects so many people in that short of time, and then not even having the materials until a few minutes before that, when I say, hey, I didn't even get this information, and then somebody's saying, oh, I forgot. So that is very, very important that we are getting the same staffing. And if we can't be a part of that, then how can a meeting move forward and decisions be made if none of us are even a part of that discussion?
Leo, did you want to respond to that, or should we move on to the next speaker?
Only to say, I mean, complete agreement. And we hear loud and clear and are working and will continue to work until we've established staff parity for the lived experience leaders on the committee.
Jenny Durkin.
Thank you. I was just going to offer that if there's anything, Leo, that the city can do to augment in the meantime If any of the lived experience members know someone that's been helpful through this process, we'll make whatever resources available in the interim as well. Because I think having that parity and the ability to be fully at the table is critical for us going forward and critical to the credibility of what we're doing. So you have whatever that people need from the city, you have it.
Thank you.
Nancy Backus.
Thank you. Yeah, it concerns me that we're trying to set the tone for how this organization is going to work together. And if there is not equity amongst all of us, it's never going to work the way we had envisioned. And so ensuring that those on this committee with lived experience are not getting those notices an hour or even just a day before, right? For most of us, this is our job during the day. And so we'll find ways to fit it in, or we have staff members that can help prep us on this work. But remember, the 3 people on this call with lived experience, this is not their full-time job that they can fit this into. They have other jobs. I don't want to speak for you, but just my sense that this work is incredibly important to all of us, but we need to make sure that we are respecting the other responsibilities that everyone on this call has in their lives, and to make sure that we're moving forward in a way where everyone feels like they have an equal voice at this table.
Up next, Jonathan.
All right, I'll say this final thing. Thank you, Ms. Backus, for acknowledging that. And also thank you, Mayor, for agreeing to source out any resources that may be available. And we will be in touch. And thank you, Mr. Flor, for being on top of this. I know that you do hard work and great work in this field. So thank you very much.
Lorena.
I actually think Kirk was trying to raise his hand in the video, and he did that before I clicked on the icon. So I'm going to ask that he go before me, and if I could go after him, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Kirk.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't find my hand raise icon. I apologize. I don't see it on my screen. But I just wanted to thank the Mayor Durkin, for offering to provide resources for us through Leo Flor's folks. And Leo, we would be glad to meet with you outside of this meeting to discuss the details of the temporary person that you mentioned, and also the actual hiring process that will be employed to get us a full-time person. So we are totally willing to do that, and we appreciate your efforts to make that happen for us. So thanks so much, you guys. Appreciate that. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Kirk. Lorena.
Thank you. I just wanted to get back to Angela's first point around discomfort moving forward on these decisions without, while knowing that the folks with lived experience don't have the appropriate infrastructure in place yet. I really want to appreciate Angela for putting that out on the table, and don't want to sort of leave it just sitting on the table. I think that, obviously we are having some issues and difficulties getting the infrastructure of folks with lived experience into place in a timely fashion, while we are also considering how to advance the goals of the KCRHA. And so, I'm just going to suggest that we consider, and I don't make the suggestion lightly because I know that the issues are urgent before us, but I'm going to suggest that any significant decisions that are intended to come before the governing committee be put on pause until we do have the infrastructure in place for those with lived experiences, so that they can meaningfully engage in the decision-making processes that are before us. And my hope is that by suggesting that we will be able to shift focus with perhaps greater intensity and expediency towards providing the infrastructure to the folks with lived experiences in a faster, more efficient manner so that we can begin to dig into the work. But I really do feel uncomfortable in a system that appears to be already lopsided towards the benefit of elected officials who have armies of staff, while we're leaving the folks with lived experiences in sort of the lurch here. And so I just want to express my extreme discomfort, and that is, consistent with the expression that I heard from Angela about that particular aspect. So I just want to suggest that we, instead of trying to sort of figure out how to impose a Band-Aid approach on the lived experience folks, that we, as the elected officials who are in a more privileged position, consider shifting that burden to ourselves and acknowledging that we have not met the needs of the lived experience cohort, and that means that we should modify our work plan and our agenda accordingly. Thank you.
So I just want to be clear. So are you proposing that we not move forward with considering the hiring of a CEO recruitment firm and therefore delay the actual hiring of a CEO for the organization? Lorena.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The next item on the agenda is consideration of CEO recruitment firm. And there's an action item right there for us to vote on whether we hire a firm. And I believe the city's human resources director was going to lead us through that. And that would then put us on a path to be able to actually recruit an individual to become the CEO of this organization. And so the first delay that would happen if we are not to take up any actions until this staffing issue for the lived experience members is resolved, that we would not be able to move forward with the CEO recruitment.
Yeah, I definitely acknowledge that is what my suggestion would result in, is a slight delay there. But, again, I do think it's important for us to make sure that this infrastructure is in place from the get-go, and just feel strongly that if the folks with lived experience on the governing committee aren't ready to make even this decision, then that's an example of sort of a structural inequity that we're unfortunately finding ourselves in right now. And that doesn't, I'm not ascribing nefarious intent to anybody. It's just sort of a matter of how these structures tend to come together. So I would really defer to John and Zanita and Kirk on whether or not they feel prepared to make this decision absent the staffing. And I think if we hear from them that they are not ready to make this decision on the CEO, that I think I would continue to be uncomfortable voting in favor of moving forward with that particular item until they are adequately staffed and ready to go.
Okay, well, that's fine. Maybe after they hear from the human resources director from the city, they can let us know whether they feel comfortable moving forward or not.
We had two more committee members who wanted to speak. We have Jonathan.
So I was just going to chime in and say that thank you, Ms. Gonzalez, for acknowledging again and speaking up. That's the good work, right? That's the work that needs to be done. And thank you all for doing that. I would suggest that right now we have been prepped ourselves adequately enough, and we would like to hear what Mr. Humes has to say before we make a final determination. But moving forward, we would like to make sure that all staff is in place. And then also, and I don't know if Mr. Humes will probably speak into this, so this is a good transition, if there is a CEO job description, I think that we need that to be shared with us. And so as we move forward with this firm, if there was to be a case today. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenny?
I was just going to suggest what I think the others have suggested, that we introduce Bobby, let him walk through the process that they followed to recruit a firm, what questions they asked, how they found them, and what the next steps would be. And then after that, the committee could ask them as many questions as they want, because it may be that there's additional work that they would want Bobby to do anyways. And if not, we can move forward depending on people's level of comfort. So I think, maybe the first thing is, I want to introduce Bobby, who spent a lot of time thinking about this. And there were some really good questions at the last meeting that people asked about, how do we select a firm? How did we make sure we had someone deeply grounded in equity, that they had themselves experience with people with lived experience or homelessness, that those types of issues. So if the committee would permit, perhaps the next step would be to have Bobby make his presentation on where we are, how he did it, people ask questions, and then we can determine what the best route is to move after that. And very mindful that I think that, I want to really defer to Jonathan and Zanita and Kirk on, as full fellow board members, how they want to proceed.
If you're asking, I'm ready to listen to Bobby Humes, and we had some of our LEC members a part of that discussion also, so I am excited to hear what Bobby has to say.
Great, I guess that's my cue. I'll go ahead and share my screen and dive into this very important work. I'd also like to start by saying, I hope you and your families and your teams are doing well, and that you're making time to breathe in this time of action and response and clarity. Where I'm starting is on page 3 of the packet that you received. And my hopes today are that I provide any answers to substantive questions that impact our process moving forward. So a brief overview. I don't have a lot of slides for you, but I plan to do some deep talking. Evaluation committee, how that was formed, what their work was, an evaluation and selection process overview, as well as our search firm evaluation process, and then our next steps. So the evaluation committee was made up of 14 members, including representatives from Sound Cities, King County, those with lived experience, and members of the City of Seattle. I'd like to thank everyone who committed their time, their purpose, and vision on this work as we continue to move through this unique process. Committee members were given the opportunity to review and evaluate the RFP scoring criteria prior to receiving their proposal packets. In addition to reviewing those proposals, they participated in 2 interviews with the Hawkins Company. More information on that soon. Assuming recommendations can be approved today, a statement of work or a contract and necessary negotiations can be completed within 3 weeks. Moving on to our selection process. The process was initiated in February of 2020. It was led by the Seattle Department of Human Resources. Only 2 qualified firms, the Hawkins Company and Workplace Change, submitted interest by the March 18th, 2020 deadline. The steering committee considered extending this RFP due to the relatively small amount of responses. And as a result of the expired deadline, the city procurement requirements restrict extensions, meaning the process would have to restart, causing a significant delay to organizational development and operations. A new search would also not guarantee an increase of responses, so the evaluation committee decided to move forward to see if either firm was a viable option. The Seattle Department of Human Resources facilitated a live scoring process with members of the evaluation committee prior to the interviews. The Hawkins Company was a clear frontrunner. Here's why. Workplace Change is located in Portland, Oregon, and is a recognized women minority-owned firm. Workplace Change did not submit substantive information on experience and qualifications, as well as delivery of services. Workplace Change failed to submit cost proposals and scored poorly on delivery of services, references, and was not invited for an interview. The Hawkins Company has vast amount of relevant experience, including recent search for the Los Angeles Homelessness Services Authority, the Regional Homelessness Authority in Los Angeles. The Hawkins Company conducts 70% of their searches nationwide and specializes in presenting diverse candidates to their clients. The Hawkins Company is also a Black-owned business, and it has committed to full local and national searches, including cultivating potential clients from communities demonstrating innovation and best practices in addressing homelessness. The Seattle Department of Human Resources facilitated an initial interview with members of the evaluation committee and representatives from the Hawkins Company. The Hawkins Company scored an average of 21 of 25 points in the interview phase, with an overall average of 89 out of 100 total points. A second interview with the Hawkins Company was not scored, but was used as a means to validate the Hawkins Company as a recommended firm with the evaluation committee. So proposed next steps, I understand that there's interest in reviewing the job description. The Seattle Department of Human Resources has provided a draft, and we will be providing that draft to the evaluation committee prior to delivering it to the governing board. And we just wrapped that up last week. So we should be able to have that mid next week for this team's review. So next steps, consider the recommendations of the evaluation committee as provided by my office. Then my office will draft and finalize a statement of work with the evaluation committee's prompt review and input. And then the Hawkins Company can begin our search per the statement of work, pending any relevant clarity or negotiations. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns?
We have no hands raised.
Jenny, did you wish to ask if folks are wanting to move forward on this?
Yeah, I think that would be the next step. First, I really want to thank you, Bobby, for your really great and thoughtful work and working with so many people, making it as inclusive as possible. And I know what you do in your day job, so I know how much you fit on your plate. So thank you for that. And I think it's worth seeing what questions people have of the process, and if people have questions, who actually was on the evaluation committee, so we can get more information about who was in that part. I think that talked a little shorthand about the categories, Bobby, but maybe you can talk a little bit about how that was formed, who participated, like the nature of the meetings. And then after that, I think the committee can decide whether we want to move forward in voting on selecting the committee, or whether we want to put a pause so people can get more information.
And we do have some folks looking to speak now. So Zanita.
Sorry, I had to unmute. So what I was just wanting to say is that we strongly support the work in the recruitment firm. The Lived Experience Coalition members participated and reviewed in that selection. Karen and Harold and Juanita, and so that is what I would like to say. We strongly support and move forward with that.
Next, we have Jonathan.
Can't hear you, Jonathan.
On mute. See, technology. Okay. I was just gonna say thank you, Mr. Ewing, for all the work that you do. I know that on the ground level that I've been tapped in a little bit, so I know that you've been working on this extensively. And then Zanita's already spoke to it. We know that some good folks that representing lived experience was a part of this process throughout. And I think my brother Kirk might want to chime in a few things. And so just thank you and keep up the good work, brother.
Next, we have Kirk.
Hey, I think I'm unmuted. Okay. First of all, thank you, Bobby Humes, for your work. I appreciate that. And we are in solidarity as far as recommending the Hawkins group. Yeah, so that's fine with us. The question I did have, though, was with regard to the job description. You mentioned that you are going to hopefully get that delivered to us mid next week. What if our group or some other block has an issue with some of the content of the job description? Will that change anything as far as you recommending the Hawkins group, or I doubt that, but will that make a difference as far as if someone just brings up a major point about an issue or regarding the content of the job description for the CEO?
That's a great question. I think it speaks to Mayor Durkin's request for me to dive a little bit deeper into how we came through this work. I'm expecting folks to have some things to say about this job description because this is folks in our region deciding what roles the CEO will need to play in this brand new, never before organization. And so I'm counting on it. I hope that we get a lot of substantive information because it's going to make our search better. It's going to make that individual's performance better, and it's going to make the outcomes of the organization best. And so absolutely, we will continue to model what we've done in our work with the evaluation committee. That's our commitment at the table to listen, to be accommodating to how people need to receive and transmit information, and giving grace and space for timelines. I've adjusted our timelines several times behind the scenes just to make sure that everyone at the table can be heard, even to the point where our initial plan was to have one interview. We heard from folks that, hey, our first interview didn't have enough substance for us to ask some deep questions. So we had a second interview so that we can just focus on questions and answers, because I would like for us early on to model what it looks like for us to be successful throughout as a regional response to ending this homelessness crisis. And so that's how I would answer that question. Are there any other questions before I jump into listing the members of the agencies and groups that were part of the evaluation committee?
No further questions.
Okay. So we have, please.
Oh, sorry. Nancy, did you have a question?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Me.
Just wondering, who is drafting the CEO job description?
So that's a great question. You all have some great questions today. So the Seattle Department of Human Resources has an internal classification compensation team. And we have a highly respected professional in this work who has done extensive analysis on the proposed scope based on the work of NIS in the past, and to sort of get a boilerplate of what this role would look like. And I think boilerplate is probably not the best language, because there is nothing to boilerplate from. This is something that we had to create. And understanding that we don't know all the ins and outs of what's expected, it's time to move that through community, starting with the evaluation committee and then this group, to make sure that as we move into our conversations with whatever the choice is here today, that we can come out the other side with the necessary talent that's ready to be successful in this role. So in short, our department did that work.
Angela?
Thank you. So thank you for all that information. I feel I'm glad that we have our members with lived experience who feel comfortable with this firm. From my end, I am also concerned about what the CEO job description looks like. I think that we should have an opportunity. I appreciate the expertise that has gone into so far looking at that, but I think part of our job is to make sure we're hiring as a group who we think is best represents, can lead this. And so it'd be, we need time to have a look at that as well. The other piece that I also want to understand is in hiring this firm, their requirements for what they put together. I know that there's some timelines involved and wanting to make a decision on the CEO by, I think, mid-September or so. I want to understand what that looks like for us to make sure we have the right amount of input into that final decision and in a timeline and back it up so that there's enough time for discussion like we're having here today to make sure we feel comfortable with the way that goes. And so that would be my ask, is to have input into the CEO job description, and also what as we hire a firm to make sure the timeline that is being put forth actually allows us to have discussion like this so that we feel comfortable.
Absolutely. I think of myself as a forever consultant. My role is to provide recommendations and products and services that help my clients meet their goals. I believe that any firm that we would put forward to you all would have that same type of ethos. And so you can expect that you'll not only see the job description, you'll see the statement of work. You know, I imagine that if your desire is the Hawkins Company, you'll have direct opportunity to communicate with them, to check in. We can write our statement of work, you know, understanding that we do have an operational timeline. We can write our statement of work with whatever necessary check-ins this body believes are necessary to make sure that you have a good pulse on the work forward. Absolutely.
Jenny?
You're muted, Mayor.
If I understood you, Bobby, I think what you said is the HR department's put together a draft, but you're now going to take that to the evaluation committee, which is the same groups who evaluated that included the broad spectrum of stakeholders. And then once they gave input, it would come to this body, so everyone would have the opportunity to review it and make suggestions, ask questions. This was not hiring the firm and approving a job description anybody had seen. And I would anticipate, Angela, that the next steps would be that they do that, they vet it through that group, bring it back to this group together with a time frame by which various decisions would need to be made by our group that we could consider to make sure that we felt that that was adequate time to do the vetting and ask the questions we need to do.
Absolutely. One caveat I would make that the next time you see me, you should expect to have not only the statement of work, but the job description as well. And a presentation on the analysis and feedback that was brought into both those documents for your contemplation. Okay. Would you still like me to go through how the evaluation team is formed? I see some heads nodding, so I'm just going to go ahead and move in that direction. So a 14-member group, and let me make sure I have everyone here. A 13-member group. Why does it say 14? Alex Ibrahimi, excuse me if I get your name wrong, I apologize, from King County. Shannon Broderick from King County. Cody Eccles from King County. Julie Stevens from King County HR. Joyce Nichols from Sound Cities. Brian Perry from Sound Cities. Juanita Spotted Elk with lived experience. Harold Oldham with lived experience. Karen Taylor from King County, Tess Colby from the mayor's office, the mayor of the city of Seattle, Lisa Gustafson from the Human Services Department in Seattle, Jeff Simmons and Tracy Ratscliffe from City of Seattle Council, and Candace Martinson from the city of Auburn. Myself and Kelly Enright served as staffers for this group. And so what we've done is primarily used email to communicate back and forth and held meetings at certain pivotal times where we all needed to be together to have open discussion about how we were going about our scoring. So our scoring process happened live, and we went through each phase of the RFP, allow people to weigh in. We weren't looking for dissenting conversations, so we weren't looking for people to negotiate or push people to change numbers. We took things as they were, but allowed people to voice concerns and appreciations. And we didn't hear any outliers. I think we were pretty consistent in your packet. I believe page 6 starts with the average scoring of the total scores. What we did also was ask folks to provide those total scores to us so that we would have record of their participation and what those scores were for record keeping purposes. And in our interview, it was any firm selection interview. We asked questions. I can share those questions if you like after this meeting so you can see what those questions were. I'll give those to Sarah for her to share with you all. pretty standard questions that focused on outcomes. You know, how successful are you? How long do your placements stay? Where do you recruit? Have you ever recruited in Seattle? What's your framework for thinking about something like this? Do you have any folks on your team with lived experience? What do you know about our continuum of care? What do you know about what's happening on the ground here in Seattle? And so those are the kind of questions that were asked, not only what we drafted, but what came secondarily from the folks on the evaluation committee. I believe that it was a very good first interview with the Hawkins Company, but again, we did run out of time, and I understand that certain individuals on the team didn't get a chance to ask questions that they wanted. And in the spirit of inclusion and clarity, we held a second interview for that purpose. And so I'm very proud of the work of these folks and their commitments. And if there's any other questions, I'd be glad to answer those.
Any further questions?
I always say I'm an only child. I'm comfortable with silence, but
I'll raise my hand.
Jenny?
With no further questions, and it sounded like most people were comfortable moving forward, I would move that we move forward with the selection of this group as indicated on the agenda.
Is there a second?
I can second that.
Great, seconded by Zanita. All right, I will move to a roll call vote. Nancy Backus? Can folks hear me? I'm going to start the roll call vote.
Yeah, did you not hear me? Sorry, I said aye.
Perfect, thank you. Angela, Bernie? Angela, Bernie?
Apologies, aye.
Dow Constantine?
Aye.
Reagan Dunn? Jenny Durkin?
Aye.
Lorena Gonzalez?
Aye.
Jonathan Hempel? Jonathan?
Hi, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
This technology, man.
Andrew Lewis?
Aye.
Kirk McLean?
Aye.
Joe McDermott?
Aye.
Ed Prince?
Aye.
Sunita Reed?
Aye.
We have 11 ayes, 0 nays.
All right,
Thank you.
by your vote, the motion is approved as presented. The next item is a discussion, or rather a brief item. April Sanders, who's senior legislative analyst for the King County Council on central staff, is going to provide a brief overview of the interlocal agreement that was established between King County Regional Homeless Authority, or rather with that established King County Regional Homelessness Authority, the interlocal between the various governments, with a focus on the governing committee's powers and the requirements for the composition of the implementation board, and how racial equity and equitable decision-making have been integrated into the KCRHA structure. April, are you, there you are. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, like Executive Constantine said, I'm April Sanders from King County Council policy staff. My goal today is provide a brief overview of the mechanisms of the interlocal agreement forming the authority, with a deeper dive into the governing committee and implementation board, bylaws, and the pro-equity features of the ILA. For the purpose of time, I'm not going to cite articles and sections for each provision, but feel free to stop me if you have any questions or want to know more information. To set some context, King County and the City of Seattle are the two parties of the agreement. However, the authority may sign contracts with other jurisdictions to establish subscribing agencies for authority services. Regardless of whether or not a local jurisdiction becomes a subscribing agency, the authority must provide services across the county. The authority is guided by a set of guiding principles outlined in Article 4, and for your reference, the ILA should be starting on page 9 of your packet, and the guiding principles are pretty early on in the interlocal agreement. I won't read through each of those, but I encourage you to take a look when you have time. I'm not going to go into much detail on CEO or staffing of the committee, other than to say that once a CEO is hired, they will develop an organizational structure and staffing plan for consideration by the implementation board and adoption by the committee. In the interim, employees from King County and Seattle will staff the authority. I'm also, for the purpose of time, not going to go over the roles of the advisory committee, other committees, the Office of the Ombuds, among other things, but I'm happy to follow up on questions offline. So starting with the governing committee, you all act as the administrators of the authority. So generally speaking, the implementation board recommends and the governing committee confirms various actions. Any action of the committee requires a quorum of 9 members to be present, though the number of votes required varies. Certain actions require a simple majority of members present, like approving performance metrics, confirming implementation board members, recommending amendments to the interlocal agreement, and changing the name of the authority, as well as approving a staffing plan. Other actions require a higher voting threshold. Actions requiring a 2/3 majority of vote of those present include approving or amending goals, policies, and plans, and approving or amending the annual budget that's recommended by the implementation board. Lastly, the removal of the CEO requires an affirmative vote of 9 members of the committee. Moving on to the implementation board, which is a little bit more lengthy, the IB is in charge of operations and management of all authority affairs. So the composition of the board is laid out very specifically in the ILA, so I'll go into that in greater detail. Firstly, membership is required to reflect the racial and ethnic makeup of King County residents overall to ensure the inclusion of members of racial and ethnic groups disproportionately experiencing homelessness. Additionally, membership is to strive to reflect a diversity of geographies. A majority of members must be people who have personal experience or expertise that enables them to credibly represent the perspectives of and be accountable to marginalized demographic populations that are statistically disproportionately represented among people experiencing homelessness. The membership as a whole is to include individuals with connections to a broad range of communities, and those are to include local business, neighborhood associations, faith groups, and the philanthropic community. However, elected officials, city, county, or authority staff are prohibited from serving on that board, as well as employees or representatives from current contract holders or entities likely to receive direct benefit from the authority. The ILA then lays out 12 skills and expertise that must be represented on the board. I won't go into each of these, as I know they are a common topic as you all brainstorm implementation board members, but they include implementation of policies that promote racial and ethnic equity within an organization, fiscal oversight, affordable housing, provision of child welfare services, and provision of services for those experiencing homelessness. The full list of these skills and expertise can be found in Article 8, Section 2. Now for the implementation board duties and voting structure. For the implementation board, a quorum is just a simple majority of those members. So there's not the requirement that, that 9 members be a quorum, it's just a simple majority. Certain resolutions require a majority of those present, so long as that equals at least one third of the total voting membership. And that includes adopting internal policies, recommending annual budgets, performance evaluations, and funding reports, and recommending a CEO for confirmation by the governing committee. In order for the board to propose amendments to the ILA or to adopt and amend bylaws, an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the total membership of the board is required. Much of the work of the implementation board early on will be on the development and recommendation of an initial work plan covering the first 18 months or so of operations and a 5-year plan that includes a theory of change. And that brings me to the end of the discussion on implementation board, unless there are questions. Not, I'll just keep plugging along.
We had a,
sorry.
We had a question from Zanita.
Perfect.
So when you're speaking about that and saying the majority of the members, and we're aware that the implementation board makes up the ILA, and there's vague language in it, which is what you just stated. But could you provide clarity around what that means? And as a group, do we want to get more specific on communities and populations most impacted, and help inform the nominations that are coming forward? Because we need the committee to agree that the majority of the implementation board needs to be people of color, Indigenous, Native, Latinx communities, and kind of take that intersectional approach to it. So could you just clarify what that means?
Sure. So I think you brought up a good point about the interlocal agreement being very high level in that regard. So it says a majority of in many instances, but it would be up to the membership of this committee and then future bylaws when adopted to be more specific on those aspects. So it's definitely up to the governing committee to make determinations if they want to define majority or things like that. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. I'll move on to bylaws. And did that answer it enough, Zanita?
I had a,
oh, sure.
Hey, this is Jonathan. I have a quick follow-up question to that. So thank you for that. And I wanted to know, in general, so what would that process look like? So we would do that, because I know that the implementation board process is ongoing right now as we speak. And so what I don't want to do is, throw a monkey in the wrench and do that, process. I appreciate the work that goes on in the ground level. So if we wanted to be specific and make sure that, as is stated in the ILA, that the communities who are most represented have a very wide diverse experience in the community that are disproportionately impacted, how soon will we be able to put that in to make sure that that is the criteria in which they're using and screening the implementation board members? And then how would that look like?
Sure. So I think it's really dependent on you all as far as process. I might invite Leo Flor to maybe jump in on the implementation plan nominating committee, because that's probably where a lot of that work would happen if you wanted to add specificity in that process.
Okay.
So I know the implementation nominating committee just met for the first time, I believe, yesterday. And I know they're going to be meeting to compile names. Oh, perfect. Leo's on. So if you want to talk through a little bit about process, that would be awesome.
Thank you, April. The nominating committee is that group of staff that this committee empowered at your last meeting to begin preparing proposed slates. As we discussed earlier in the meeting, because we do not yet have the staff parity, we have been inviting the lived experience leaders, the governing committee meeting members themselves to the meetings. I am aware, Zanita mentioned earlier that there was an invitation that did not get to some of the members of the governing committee. And so I'm tracking that, and I think we have corrected that, and that's something that all of the staff apologizes for. And so the concept there is absolutely to be able to have complete inclusion. There are two paths to nomination for implementation board members. So the lived experience members and the continuum of care board have the ability to appoint 3 members to the governing committee. The ILA contemplates that process is actually independent of the rest of the staff work to identify the remainder of the implementation board members that would be proposed. And the idea there was to essentially create the direct ability for the lived experience leaders to be able to directly nominate who they believe should be the implementation board members. And then we are also collectively, all of us, working to identify the proposed remaining 9 members, so lived experience leaders, and all the rest of the staff nominating committee for the remaining 9 members to identify what would become the full slate. And so the question on a majority of the members needing to be people who are representative of and accountable to communities that are marginalized and demographically overrepresented amongst persons experiencing homelessness, that language within the ILA. I think that what we will do as a staff committee is to have that data, and as Anita mentioned, there are clear patterns in who is overrepresented amongst persons experiencing homelessness, and then to identify those demographic categories, and then to ensure that at least a majority of the persons that we would propose in a slate to the governing committee for total membership of the implementation board must at least be a majority of persons that represent and are accountable to those communities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next we have Kirk. Oh, I'm sorry, John.
No, I was just saying thank you because he was answering my question that April told to him. So no problem. Go ahead, Kirk.
Sure. I'm in total agreement with that, with what you said, Leo. I believe that it's crucially important for the implementation board members to reflect the diversity and the folks who are do have lived experience and who are marginalized folks, and so it should reflect that population. And with that in mind, I want to make a motion at this time. And this motion has been written down. I'm going to read it verbatim because I think the verbiage of this motion is very important. And so forgive me for having to do that, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it now and ask for a second. I'd like to make a motion to have a special governance meeting with the newly seated implementation board and staff for racial equity and anti-oppression training so that board members can better understand the root causes of homelessness and have a shared consciousness regarding the language and tools needed to dismantle white privilege, anti-Blackness, indigenous invisibility, and other forms of oppression in our collective governance work. So that is my motion.
I'll second that motion.
All right, a lot of seconds. So who's the first second and who's the third?
Dibs.
Dibs, okay.
So I will rule that to be in order because we're just getting started and we don't really have a very well-defined set of rules about when we make motions for action items. Further discussion about that?
I would just chime in and say that I think that that's a wonderful idea, and it really brings forth what the original intention and vision was as envisioned and set out by the theory of change, and also all the work that went into this organization. So that's a great idea, Kirk, and thank you. And I guess I would forfeit if first, second, and third is already taken. There we go.
And then Zanita had her hand raised before the motion. Zanita, would you like to speak on the motion or wait until after this motion?
No, I'll just wait. No, I'll just wait till after. I was just going to say after.
Okay. For discussion on the motion? All right. Then, Sarah, could you call the roll?
All right. Nancy Backus.
Aye.
Angela Burney.
Aye.
Dow Constantine.
Aye.
Reagan Dunn. Jenny Durkin.
Aye.
Lorena Gonzalez.
Aye.
Jonathan Hemphill.
Aye.
Andrew Lewis.
Aye.
Kirk McLean.
Aye.
Joe McDermott.
Aye.
Ed Prince.
Aye.
Zanita Reed.
Aye.
That's 11 ayes, 0 noes.
The motion is adopted, and I would ask staff who's here and staff who is hired to provide backup for members representing those with lived experience to make that happen. Where were we in this presentation, Mabel?
So we are just about to enter bylaws, but Sarah, did we have any other questions before I dive into that?
We had one staff request to have Kirk repeat the motion for the record. Kirk, could you recite the motion one more time?
Kirk, you're on mute.
Okay, how's that? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to make a motion to have a special governance meeting with the newly seated implementation board and staff for racial equity and anti-oppression training so that the board members can better understand the root causes of homelessness and have a shared consciousness regarding the language and tools needed to dismantle white privilege, anti-Blackness, indigenous invisibility, and other forms of oppression in our collective governance work.
And just to make sure they got it, maybe you can just shoot a written copy of that to Sarah or post in the chat so that
no problem. I can do
make
that.
sure they get verbatim.
Sure. Thank you. I will do that.
Thank you. April, go ahead.
Great.
Oh,
so
no. Zanita, did you get your comments in? You're good? Okay. All right.
So at our last governing committee meeting, members brought up the adoption of bylaws. So I wanted to touch on the process outlined in the ILA. So both the governing committee and the implementation board are provided with the authority to adopt their own bylaws. For this body, it requires an affirmative vote of the majority of members present, so long as there's a quorum. So it's just a simple majority. And the ILA, being a higher level document, does not go into detail on many aspects of our operations, including meeting location, dates, etc. So bylaws will provide that additional direction for the body's functionality. The ILA really doesn't go into any greater detail than that. So it's the body to decide about how to go about development of the bylaws. I hear a question. Sorry, I thought I heard a question. Okay, perfect. Now moving on to pro-equity features in the ILA. So the mission of the organization, as outlined in the interlocal, is to significantly decrease the incidence of homelessness throughout King County using equity and social justice principles. This is detailed further in Article 8, Section 2, which states the equity-based decision-making framework will be used to inform the authority's policies, processes, and funding decisions with an explicit equity and racial justice analysis. The authority must proactively seek to eliminate racial and ethnic disproportionalities in populations experiencing homelessness and to eliminate disparities in outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. This includes addressing structural racism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, and other sources of inequity. The authority is required to establish processes to measure, evaluate, and respond to the impact of decisions on its goal of advancing equity. The framework discussed is not just conceptual, but is required to be, is a framework informed by people with lived experience and approved by the implementation board and governing committee. Additionally, the makeup of the governing committee and implementation board are guided by pro-equity features. The governing committee is required to strive to reflect the racial and ethnic makeup of King County, while the implementation board is required to reflect the ethnic and racial makeup of King County to ensure the inclusion of members of racial and ethnic groups disproportionately experiencing homelessness. So that brings me to the end of my overview. I'm happy to take questions, or if it's a question better offline, that's great as well.
I'm not seeing any hands. Does anyone want to ask questions or make comments on April's presentation? All right. If not, I want to thank you, April. That was a really good presentation, and all your work on this has been very, very helpful, and we really appreciate it. We appreciate the County Council's contribution to this important work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have the next item, consideration of 2020 Governing Committee Work Plan. And I think, Jenny, were you going to introduce that?
Yes, thank you. I know that we've been moving through a lot of things, but I wanted to introduce Jason Johnson again, who many of you met before. And he wants to walk us through each of the topics of interest here. We know that at the end, as he walks us through, we'll have some discussion. If there's requests for changes, we can do that. There's no formal vote that is going to be required today. But we do want to make sure that he can walk us through the plan and people get the chance to ask their questions as we continue to move forward. Jason, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor. And good morning, everyone. I hope this finds you doing well. I know that there is a lot on your plates, in your minds and in your hearts. And I really appreciate you taking the time to focus on today's discussion and continuing to move forward the work of the King County Regional Homeless Authority. For this agenda item, I'll ask that you please refer to the macro timeline in your meeting materials and the 2020 schedule of key events for Governing Committee and Implementation Board. That document was also included in your packet. First, we discussed the macro timeline at your last month's meeting. You'll see that we changed this document slightly to make it more legible and to break out the operational stand-up timelines by quarters, highlighting some of the key activities across the top. We also included future meetings of the Governing Committee and Implementation Board. Before going into the specifics of your meeting schedules and agendas, I wanted to give just sort of a advance notice, a bit of a commercial that Leo and I will be coming to this governing body later this summer with a more detailed operational plan, including details of the transfer of departmental employees, roles and functions of the departments and the continuum of care, and a migration plan for program investments and contracts. Today, on behalf of the staff team supporting each of you, I wanted to present the discussions and decisions that are needed from this committee to move the work of the King County Regional Homeless Authority forward. I'll go through the schedule of key events for you quickly so that there is time for a discussion of these agenda topics and the schedule. At your last meeting, you agreed to meet monthly every third Thursday morning. Today's meeting aside, and with one special meeting added to your schedules in July, this provides only 7 opportunities for you to gather and conduct the business of the Governing Committee in 2020. Just to further drive home this point, you have 14 hours scheduled together formally this year and have much to accomplish in that time. With that in mind, your staff team has proposed a schedule of agenda topics and discussions for your consideration today. As I just mentioned before, there's a special meeting scheduled on July 9th for you to review and confirm a slate of nominations to serve on the Implementation Board. At your last meeting, you directed your staff team and your colleagues representing people with lived experience to serve as your nominating committee. Present your nominees to the Implementation Board and discuss how these nominations met the demographic and characteristics outlined in the ILA. That work is underway, and the nominations committee is preparing to bring this slate of nominations to the July 9th meeting. At your regularly scheduled July meeting, you will discuss and adopt bylaws and select committee co-chairs, a committee chair or co-chairs. This can also be a meeting where you begin to align on the regional authority's theory of change, centered on racial equity and integrated throughout the ILA and the governance structure that you're part of. August's meeting is where Leo and I will present the detailed operational plan describing the transfer of functions, investments, and staffing from the city and county departments to the regional authority. This will include 2020 budget immediately available to the CEO, to begin building their leadership team and the systems of support that they'll need in place to begin their work. You'll see in September a joint meeting of the Governing Board and Implementation Board. At this meeting, jointly, you will select the CEO. That'll be a really exciting moment and a key moment in standing up the regional authority. This can also be a time when together the Governing Committee and Implementation Board can ensure role clarity and dive more deeply into your alignment related to racial equity. October, briefing on the Seattle Mayor and King County Executives' proposed budgets for the King County Regional Authority. November, we'll review and accept the CEO's 2021 staffing proposal. And in December, you could review the CEO's initial operations plan and continue discussions of the staffing plan and timelines. This schedule and agenda topics is of course based on what we know now. There will likely be other discussions that you'll need to incorporate into this list, of course, such as the discussion and training on racial equity is just was discussed. But this is a start to building a meeting agenda and work plan for you. And I'll stop there and see if folks have any questions and hand back to Mayor Durkin for any further discussion or needed approval.
I think people can just raise their hands for questions for Jason.
Angela?
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I would say just, I don't have an issue with the schedule that you're setting out, but I will say from actually hitting the marks on that schedule, there's some structures that we have to put in place. We're going to get that work done. For example, it's been mentioned a few times, either meeting notices or materials haven't been made available with enough time to really dive into it before the meeting. And I know that is a struggle for me in my work to set aside that time. I can only imagine what it's like for others in their daily lives to make sure they have enough time to fit that in to review the materials and have a thoughtful discussion. So if we can put some structures into place would be very helpful for me, and I would ask the rest of the members to share how it would work for them as well. I'm used to having a very clear agenda memo with each of the items, so I know exactly what's being presented and what the ask is for me and when it's due, when we need to make it happen. So that kind of structure with an agenda memo. Having the materials a week before would be ideal for me, so I can work it into my schedule and have this set aside the time I need to really think about what's presented. And especially if you're asking us to make a decision in a meeting at that time without having a month or week, a previous meeting to review that. So that's another ask I have. And so those structures, I'm sure there's some other things that other members would find to help them through really getting thoughtful decisions made in this time schedule. That would be great. The other piece, you had mentioned the theory of change, and I think that I recall seeing it last year in PIC, and I will say, if this process is to be what we are hoping it to be, to something different, something that really works, something that helps people get them out of homelessness and put them in permanent housing, I think that it would be important for us to take a look at that theory of change and see if that really meets the needs of this group where we see this going. So that would be an important piece that I think as well. We're trying to be different. We're trying to set up a system for here and now, and having things created for us beforehand and bring to us now that we're just we're supposed to just adopt without having that real work. I think is important to really scrutinize some of those things. Just like Kirk brought forward that that option or the request, and we're going to do it, to have that training to make sure we're all on the same page. I think those pieces need to be scrutinized. Every other piece like that need to be scrutinized to make sure that we're doing the right thing for this group, for the people we're trying to serve, to get them out of homelessness and into permanent housing. So I think we have to scrutinize all those things.
Jonathan?
First, again, thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your presentation. And I just wanted to echo some of the thoughts that Ms. Angela just said around the fact, especially centering the theory of change. I know that a lot of people on the ground, especially those with lived experience, spearheaded and ensured that we had a fully fledged draft theory of change framework. I personally had a hand in that, and so I just want to, and I can help you lead that if you would like, and work with you on that to make sure that everybody in the governing committee has that information and knows the theory of change, and also the decision-making tool that was already put in and worked on as well. Also, and if it's not in the work plan, then I suggest that we also have just a time to set aside to master those tools and to make sure that everyone understands what a theory of change is. And especially this is going to be something I put in for you, Mr. Humans, if you still hear me, in the job description, to make sure that the CEO understands what a theory of change is, because I understand that a lot of people may not know what a theory of change is and be on the same playing field on what that means and what that looks like. Thank you.
Not seeing any other hands, I'll take an opportunity to just acknowledge and say that I hear you. And as a member of the staff team, we are talking regularly about how we can be better at ensuring that you have all of the tools that you need and the time that you need to make these important decisions. This is an incredibly tight and accelerated timeline, and you have my commitment on behalf of the staff group that we will be doing everything we can to, work as much as possible, as as smartly as possible, to make sure that this group is supported in making those decisions. We also, you'll see that in this, initial work plan and schedule of agendas, we tried to carve out time, acknowledging that not everyone has the same level of understanding about theory of change, about advancing racial equity, the decision-making frameworks that are built into the ILA and therefore built into this governance structure. And so we tried to carve those out, but at your direction, if you feel like you need additional time together, additional meetings, special meetings, to focus on any other aspect of this work ahead of making decisions, we stand ready to support you, and we'll do what we can to make sure you enter those discussions prepared.
Dow?
Just to kind of reflect on the schedule presented here and the other work that we've done today, all of which is critical to us being able to move together as an entire community. I want to channel my inner Nancy Bacchus and pose the question, how many people have been housed during our last hour and 35 minutes of meeting? There's an urgency out there, even though, Jason, you're talking about this being extremely truncated process and so forth. We were going to hire a CEO in September, and we're going to get a staffing plan in November, and we're going to have an initial work plan in December. And I feel like that, as fast as it is relative to normal bureaucratic processes, is excruciatingly slow compared to what the situation demands. And so even as we're making sure that we're getting everything in the correct order and making sure everyone is comfortable with all that we're doing. We gotta keep pulling that fire alarm and making sure that we're keeping the people who are suffering on the streets in the center of this work, and get going on helping people get housed and get the other help they need. That's a generic comment that calls for no specific action, but maybe we need to start each meeting with a reminder of the urgency of the moment.
Nancy?
Thank you, Dow, for remembering what I what I usually get a little frustrated about in these meetings in All Home. I also want to remind everyone that in this current pandemic, right now we have an eviction moratorium. That eviction moratorium is not going to be around forever unless we, as local electeds, do something in our own jurisdictions. But at that time that eviction is no longer, a moratorium is no longer in place, we are going to have a significant number more people who are facing homelessness. And so this work doesn't get put aside. It becomes even more critical that we focus a lot of our attention on this so that we can do I realize we're not here for prevention. That's not what this group is supposed to do, but we're going to be facing a lot more individuals who are experiencing homelessness, and make sure that we are centering that in some of this discussion as well, so that we can do what we can to avoid that.
Anita?
Thank you, Dal and Nancy, for that. So when you say we're not here for prevention, and yes, there is an urgency, so why have we not then, if we're only meeting once a month and it's such an urgency that we get the CEO, and all of these things in place, why has there not been the selection of maybe just a smaller group, that includes those with lived experience or somebody, so we can get at least that critical piece done? Because really, and we should be thinking about prevention. We don't want anybody to go homeless. That's in itself a stress if you think I'm going to become homeless. Just like calling someplace that says we have eviction prevention, but then you're asking me for a 3-day pay or vacate, so now I'm already going to be evicted before you say you can help me, and then when you get that, then I'm already out of my place. So we should really also in the back of our minds be thinking about prevention. But as critical as the CEO is, that needs to be more in a forefront, and we should maybe have a different meeting or smaller meeting so that can be done before November or December.
Kirk?
Yeah, I work with homeless people every day. I work with the CEA, the Coordinated Entry for All program, and I do assessments on people every single day who are homeless, who are literally homeless, sleeping in their car or on the street. And I believe moving forward with this work plan it's really, really critical that we have a framework, a racial equity framework that informs our decisions as we move forward, moment by moment. Almost, it seems that important, because if we don't do that, I can envision us doing more harm than good, or at least at the least being ineffectual. Like I said, I talk to folks who are homeless every day, and I can see the inadequacies of what we're doing right now and how it's really not working. And so, and I can also see that those processes and procedures are they're discriminating, or they're resulting in discriminatory outcomes for people of color. And so I think it's just major critical for us to make sure that this work plan has a racial equity lens, that we have to stick to it just like glue, because if we don't, we're going to slowly and end up doing how we did it before, which is a way that didn't work. So I just want to emphasize that to this group, that I know we're on a tight schedule, and I look at this work plan and the schedule we're going on, and it's just like, wow, how can we get this stuff done in time? But I say that quality over quantity, or quality over, just getting things done, because we have to do it right this time. We have the people, we have the intelligence, we have all of the resources we need to do this right. And I think if we have to slow down, we should just slow down, because we probably can't get it right any other way, I think.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I would just like to echo the sentiments everyone else said, especially Kirk and Zanita. And the fact of the matter is, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Like, we can make sure that the principles and that the framework and everything like that is baked into everything that we do moving forward. And what I will do is I will email out and work with Jason Johnson to ensure that everyone has that tool available, and we can start, even if the work has to be done offline. I know in the grassroots, a lot of the work has to be done when not in the major meetings. And so it has to be done, we got to set aside some time to really talk to each other, get to know each other, and then get up equal footing on, the nature of what we're actually tasked to do. So I'm going to challenge everyone here to try to commit to that the best way they can. And hopefully we can, break down these institutional barriers by breaking down some barriers that, are between us. And then also, I just want to champion the fact that everything that going forward, like with this regional authority, what we have here is not only just, to end homelessness, it's also to prevent it. And also it addresses a critical question around poverty, because of the fact that a lot of the folks that are about to be homeless or in danger of entering the homeless system are 1 or 2 paychecks away. And we've seen right now, we've lived it with the COVID-19 crisis, that when those jobs went away immediately, record numbers unemployed, and we had to institute those moratoriums. And I dread right now in the state, that the King County is in, and I know that a lot of people can speak to this, is that when the moratorium ends, we don't have jobs in place to have everybody be able to bounce back and be able to pay their rent or their back rent on time. And so that's what's on the line here. We're looking at a bigger crisis, and that I don't even know right now our authority isn't set up, and I don't know if the people on the ground, the folks, the CEA, the providers are ready to take in that, that amount. So we need to do everything that we can. And I'm speaking to the choir here. I know you guys are awesome, but it has to be said. So let's walk and chew gum at the same time, and let's also prevent as we end.
Are there additional people with their hands raised? Well, if I were to summarize the discussion, I think there's a combination of people would like to be able to stay on the work plan and get stuff done as expeditiously as possible, but to be able to get materials earlier, particularly those related to weightier issues, so they have time to consider them, really get their way through them, have deliberation. So I think that the goal should be to do that, and then maybe we can give some thought if there's any of these items we think we could expedite. We should do that. I think that we have a lot of discussion about, I think, prevention really is part of this, but we as a board and implementation board will be looking program to program. It's been a growing part of both what Dow's done at King County and what I and the council have done in Seattle. So if there's no further questions and no other business, Leo, do you have any further thoughts? I think you've got the last words, and if not, then we'll adjourn the meeting.
One last thing.
We do have
I'll talk all day. Let me let everybody else go before I do it. Before I go. There we go. Be quiet.
We have Nancy.
So the reason that I said we don't focus on prevention here is because when this was forming, that was part of that statement, is that we were not going to be working on prevention. That's the only reason that I said that. It was in the documentation that we were receiving, is that this work was not prevention, but there would be other work that was prevention. Only reason I said that, because I am all for working on prevention, but I just want to be clear that that's why I made that statement.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan?
Can you hear me? Okay, good. No, thank you, Ms. Backus, for that clarification. And if that is in the original paperwork, then we have to work to amend that right now, because as we've seen right now, we need to adapt to and ensure that prevention is also a part of the work and the scope that we're doing with the Homelessness Regional Authority. And also, this is probably something offline, but I want to put it on your radar and everyone else's radar, especially around the youth and the young adult focus and that work, because that when we talk about prevention, those youth that are coming out of these systems and are also trying to maintain jobless circumstances, disproportionately youth of color are also going at high risk of homelessness. So I'm going to work on you with that, Jason and Leo, and thank you, Ms. Backus, for that clarification. I don't want to butcher your name. It's a cool name. So I guess
we have nothing from Leo.
Sarah, is there, just to speak on the fact that what Ms. Backus was highlighting, is there in the original paperwork that was sent out, is there any amendments that need to be made that we can motion right now that you know of, or is that something that we can hold off until another meeting to make sure that that is correct? Because if it's on the record, it's on paper, then we need to make sure that the records reflect what we're doing.
It's not really Sarah's arena.
Yeah, we can. This is Jason. I think we can, look at what's been documented as a staff team. For the City of Seattle's homeless prevention dollars will be part of the regional authority. So there are prevention investments that the city makes that will be under the programmatic purview of the regional authority. I think where the conversation was when we were talking about the delineation between prevention and sort of crisis response is that there is work inside of the Human Services Department, inside of DCHS, inside of organizations across the county that do really incredible far upstream work that we all consider prevention. That includes the building of housing, building of permanent supportive housing, efforts such as rent assistance, even efforts such as subsidies and programs to support employment and childcare and things like that are all considered prevention efforts. Those have not been packaged under the authority of the regional authority. Those remain efforts that continue to live inside of the King County and City of Seattle Human Services Departments, as well as in cities throughout King County. And so I think that's the delineation here. We're using prevention to mean a whole lot of things. When we talk about homeless prevention and the dollars, the programs that are specifically targeted at preventing homelessness from occurring, those investments from the City of Seattle will be part of the regional authority.
Okay. Ms. Gonzalez, you look like you're ready to say something. I don't want to speak.
Oh, I was, if I can, I just wanted to say that I appreciate this conversation. I think it is it was a while ago when we considered the ILA and the particulars around sort of the scope and the nature of the work of this entity. I do, recognize that April did a very good job of describing, trying to give us that refresher, but it might be worth in a future meeting just revisiting this particular issue as described in the ILA so that we're all on the same page as it relates to what the call to action is here as described in the ILA. And of course, there's going to be opportunity to fill in some of the gaps through the bylaws conversation. I also just wanted to comment really quickly on two things. One, on the work plan, I noticed that there is in November an opportunity for the county and the city through the mayor and the executive to present to this group their proposed budgets. And then in December, there are some other decisions. And I'm just noticing that I just want to sort of put on the record that there is a step that appears to be missing in the work plan that acknowledges that those proposed budgets are proposed budgets and could be subject to amendatory work and revision by our respective city councils. And so, I see Councilmember McDermott, Joe, sorry, first name's here, Joe, shaking his head, nodding up and down. And I think it's important for us to be on the same page as it relates to that process. There could be things that would be changed for that proposed budget by our respective councils. And so just want to acknowledge that there might be a need to have a loop back with this group after our respective councils have gone through their budget process, so that we have an accurate sense of what the appropriations ultimately are as it relates to this particular group. So that's one thing I just wanted to put out there on the table. The last thing that I'll say is that I'm a little sort of going back to the issue of notice and how much information we all have before these meetings. I'm a little concerned. I've been hearing some comments online and in my inbox about feelings from the public that these meetings are not being sufficiently noticed to the public in order to provide members of the public an opportunity to view our conversations and be engaged through public comment. And obviously today we had a really short public comment period. So I just want to encourage, I think the county is taking the lead on noticing these to perhaps do that in a little bit more of a robust way. To allow sufficient public notice to members of the public who can engage in our work. And I'm happy to help with sort of amplifying, and maybe for those of us who are elected officials here, we can use our own infrastructure through our own communications department to bolster the notification that these meetings are happening to the general public, and we can rely on folks with lived experience to also help us get the word out to their networks as well, to make sure that folks feel like we're not doing our business in sort of these private conversations, which I know they're not private, but I want to make sure that we're being extra careful about and extra proactive about notifying the general public about these meetings. Thank you.
I don't know, Lynn, I've been assured that my budget is going to be adopted without amendment. Joe may have not gotten the memo on that yet, but it's on its way.
Told me the same thing, Dow.
I'm telling you right now, Jenny, that's not going to be the case.
Hopefully by November we'll have almost a budget done. So I think that will.
One can hope, right?
I think we've got an obligation to try to wrap up. If people have additional thoughts, I think this has been very helpful for us to. I know it's really hard when you can't meet in the same room, and I think these kind of conversations that we're having are really good just for us to be able to start setting some kind of relationships and tempo and expectation. I would urge that if people have questions or thoughts or concerns, don't wait till the meeting itself. These are happening on a monthly basis, but Jason and Leo are available to take any questions you have. Bobby of HR is available. So please do reach out. And because I think they are trying to work as hard as they can to answer any questions in the interim so that we will be able to move forward. But this is one of the first meetings we've had. I know we've got a super ambitious work plan, but I think to Dow's point, echoing what Nancy always says is, we've got a crisis that we have to deal with. And we have some really bright, ingenious minds sitting here on this call, together with, I noted at the high point, almost over 100 participants with the public. So I think that while we can do more to get more transparency, and we should also recognize that we have an obligation to keep moving and to try to use all of our voices to amplify the work we're doing and to take as much information in and comment in from as many people as possible. Because at the end of the day, the work we do will only have legitimacy if people feel that they were heard, that they really feel that we're doing what we need to do to address this crisis. So I want to thank everybody for their work here today. And unless there's any further order of the business, we will adjourn the meeting for today. Is that right, Dow?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone take care. Be healthy.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.